if you're in a relationship and suffering physical abuse, you can turn to the law. If you're subjected to psychological abuse, it's more complicated. Now the government is considering making emotional harm a crime too. Some say the law should just keep out of our private lives. Others say it's much needed. Anna Lark was emotionally abused by her partner at the time, the comedian Justin Lee Collins. He was convicted of harassment causing fear of violence 2 years ago.
My emotional abuse started very, very gradually. At the beginning, he was very nice, charming. The first few gifts he gave me was a really nice mobile phone, a really nice smartphone. And I thought, that's really, really kind. And then he said to me, this phone has got a new number. So this is your new number now. Your life with me now is our fresh start. The past, you know, all the people that you've known in your past, they are in your past now. You are not to contact anyone you've ever worked with. You are not to contact any of your friends anymore. It's me and you now versus the world.
During her time with him, she says she felt her personality was gradually being eroded.
There was no part of my life that he didn't have an opinion on or a criticism on, you know, he had a method of control for every single part of my life.
Anna left him after her father contacted the police, but she says she found it very difficult.
I was so brainwashed, he'd reprogrammed me to... I just didn't even know who I was anymore. I was absolutely heartbroken. But you can't live your life in fear. It just wrecks everything.
She welcomes plans to toughen the law and believes it would make abusers think twice and give victims the strength to come forward.
This law would have made it easier for me. It would have made me realise what I was going through was actually abuse. If, you know, these laws had been in place, I think I would have been more confident maybe to go forward, because you always think, who's going to believe me? With these new laws, police will be able to recognise it more. It will show the government is supporting and realising that emotional abuse is really damaging, really very damaging. Also, that the abuser will maybe think what I'm doing could get me in massive, massive trouble. And also the person being abused, you know, will have the confidence to come forward.
Anna Lark, who's in favour of toughening up the law. What do you think? It's our question for our text and online vote this week. Should emotional abuse in a relationship be a crime? Text the word VOTE followed by yes or no to 81771. Text will be charged at your standard message rate. You can only vote once. You can go online to vote for free at bbc.co.uk/Sunday Morning Live, where you can find terms and conditions, and results will be announced before the end of the programme. So, Polly Neate from Women's Aid first. How often are you hearing stories like Anna's?
All the time. I mean, this kind of extreme controlling behaviour is almost the defining element of domestic violence, really, more so than actual physical violence. And victims tell us as well that the effects are much more long-lasting and more damaging, actually, than even the effects of physical violence. It's also incredibly dangerous if you really have, and we are talking about extreme controlling behaviour that outside of an intimate relationship would already be illegal.
So how do you define it then?
Well, it needs to be defined very carefully in law, but we're talking about where one partner controls every aspect of another partner's life through fear. It's the use of extreme fear over a period of time to create control over a partner. And actually what we know is that in that situation it's actually can be more dangerous than physical violence. If the partner decides to leave, she may very well end up very seriously injured or dead.
And in the consultation document, the government says the abuse can encompass, but is not limited to, psychological, physical, sexual, financial, emotional. Do we need a new law to cover the things that aren't covered at the moment?
I'm not exactly a libertarian, but I do think slinging endless laws around, which frankly don't solve the problem, but do enrich lawyers, who I have a very beady feeling about, I don't know that it will help at all. I mean, these women, of course, it's awful that they're bullied in this way, but in a sense, first of all, you can get divorced, as you know, and you can cite all that. Secondly, I think the whole business of proof, I mean, you just have to watch the Jeremy Kyle programme, where there are all these women saying, he did this, he did that, you know, and the man comes on and says, I didn't, and everything. It's so difficult to prove, and just because you've got one side of the story, which is the woman's side, it doesn't mean it's true. It may be true, or it may be something internalised in her, which may come from not just marriage or partnership, but from her background.
So it gets back to the definition point, which is actually it might be a difficult thing to prove. Robert, are you in favour of it?
You called me a politician. I think I'm rather a parliamentarian, really, because, of course, if there is a law, I'll presumably be speaking and voting on this issue. I absolutely sympathise with Polly. I think she's dead right. It's a very serious problem. Nobody's mentioned men being bullied, but of course that also happens, as I'm sure you appreciate.
Yes, the Mankind Initiative says it can be up to 30%, although the government says it's about 16%, but it is still a problem.
But of course, you're quite right. The difficulty is how you make a law which would really cover the injury which is caused. I think it's going to be really impossible to see how you can do that. And the problem with bad law is that it gets neglected. Already at the moment, physical abuse is a very difficult thing even to prove now, even when the police are reluctantly called in, which is, of course, one of the issues, I think, that we see in our society. So how you're going to regulate verbal abuse or psychological abuse seems to me to be colossally difficult.
Well, Milo, under existing law, there is a crime which covers stalking and harassment, and that covers controlling and coercive behaviour, but it doesn't explicitly apply to relationships, intimate relationships.
No, it doesn't, but it could be used to help people. On the statistics earlier that you were referring to, the 30% means that 30% of all domestic abuse victims are men, that 16% or so of men at some point in their lives will experience domestic abuse. I think we have to be clear about what this law is doing. This law is effectively criminalising marital discord. It's criminalising arguments in the household. I mean, to be perfectly frank with you, every relationship I've ever been in, either or both of us could have been locked up under this law at some point in the relationship. I mean, it's ridiculous. And I think that once you get the state...
But if one is stronger than the other in the relationship, then how do you defend the weaker person?
Yeah, well, I think...
And in an abusive, a psychologically abusive relationship, sometimes it's very difficult to leave because you don't have the strength and the protection to do so.
Well, you say that, but I think men are getting a little bit sick of being, you know, demonised all the time as a sort of, you know,
as
strong, overbearing bullies.
Yes, and it's men
just
as well who are bullied.
Indeed, and you know what's more overbearing than, and we all know them, than these sort of shrewish wives who control their husbands. This is not a man-woman thing. I mean,
this is very much. I mean, it's like from time immemorial, women have been denounced for nagging, which is a similar sort of thing. I nag my husband, and in fact, I have I once, in a terrible row, bit him in the arm, which was nothing really, but it swelled up so much. I said, oh dear, I think you better go to the doctor. And the family doctor said, well, I don't think Anne's got rabies, so it's not a solve. But I could have been prosecuted under any of these things, and so could my husband, because he does control things.
Well, only if he decided to prosecute.
Exactly.
Well...
Yeah, but one thing that we don't hear a lot about, and one thing that, you know, I mean, dozens of women a year, for example, are prosecuted for false rape claims.
Yeah.
You know, and one of the things that is difficult to introduce into this debate is vindictiveness. And, you know, we're only human. I mean, I'm sure all of us have had that instinct.
I mean, that's a good point, and I'll put it to Polly in a moment, but I want to talk to Paula Roan Adrian, who's a barrister who's represented many victims of domestic abuse. Welcome to the programme. Would any change make a difference to the women that you support and represent?
Well, from listening to some of the members of your panel, absolutely, because education is the key, and the suggestion that this is just about having a row with your partner is absolutely wrong and quite frankly insulting to the number of victims out there. And secondly, the suggestion that somehow lawyers are going to become rich off this, I think speaks more about your panel members than it does about the people who are suffering, and I'm sure Polly will agree. The reality is that people are suffering and children are witnessing the suffering. And clarity is the key here. So we're not talking about a new law per se, we're talking about clarity. And I just want to get across to your viewers that you can already seek redress from the courts and the police if you are suffering from intimidation, harassment or pestering. It's already there. But what people are unclear about is how they have that right to seek that redress. And what the government quite rightly want to do is expressly state the fact that you can go and seek redress in those circumstances. And that cannot be wrong. When we talk about torture, okay, when the UN Charter talks about torture, it talks about sleep deprivation, it talks about isolation, it talks about brainwashing. Well, you've already heard in your earlier video about how that happens. That is a form of torture. Why is it that we suddenly think that because you're in a relationship with someone, that it's permissible?
All right, Robert, could you answer that point?
I'm surprised to hear a lawyer speaking like this, frankly, because...
It's the way they do.
Forgive me, the question is when you invoke the criminal law, you have to have evidence, and the evidence is very difficult. If you have physical abuse, you can see sometimes the evidence of that. When it comes to verbal abuse, you don't. Look at what the police do with other examples. For example, racial discrimination. There are placards out saying, kill the Jews.
Right, well, let me put that directly...
How do you prosecute that?
Let me
really difficult
put that question directly to Paula. How do you prove that you've been emotionally or psychologically abused?
Okay, it's not actually that difficult to do, and as in the case of many situations where you are saying that you've suffered harm from another, it does normally boil down to one word against the other. That's undoubtedly true, but that's our job, and that's the job of a judge to get to the bottom of the facts. Now, what you are dealing with, remember, is a course of behaviour. So, for example, if we're talking about somebody who's been locked out of their home with their child for the 15th time in a month, if we're talking about somebody who's had their credit cards cut up, if we're talking about somebody who can't get to their earnings because they're automatically put into the bank account of the other partner.
Yes, all those things you could presumably come forward and provide some proof, the cut-up credit cards, that not being able to go to and get your finances out. When it comes to somebody, whether it be man or woman, coming back home after a late night and bullying their partner, that is a much, much more difficult thing to prove in a court of law, surely.
Without doubt, but that doesn't mean that it shouldn't be. That doesn't mean that there shouldn't be steps taken to protect someone. And what we're talking about here, for example, very obvious, is threats to kill. People suffer with threats to kill all the time, and the police are able to bring charges in relation to those.
All right, Paula, thanks very much. We're going to cross to the Greenbelt Festival and join Nell, who's there with some guests. Morning, Nell.
Keep moving in, please.
Hello there. Yes, well, we are at the Greenbelt Festival. I've got two experts here to talk to me about this. Natalie Collins, what do you think? I mean, you work quite closely and you work in addressing domestic abuse. Do you think that the bill will make any difference?
I think it's really important, firstly, that we understand what emotional abuse is, and that there's quite a lot of people who are quite concerned that acrimonious relationships will result in one person ending up in prison. And it's not about a relationship issue. It's about one person choosing to behave in a way that is degrading another person, humiliating them, devaluing them, isolating them, exploiting them. And so I think currently those things are not illegal. It is not illegal to stop somebody talking to their family or friends or controlling their money.
So do you hope the bill will kind of enforce those?
Yeah, so I think that it's a powerful message to send to society, to send to women who are currently experiencing that thing, and for perpetrators that this is really serious.
Sarah Hyde, you work with women in the criminal justice system. What do you think? Will this actually help the victims of the crimes?
I think it will help the victims. It's good as a profile raising. I welcome its inclusion in the definition of domestic violence, but we have to stop regarding prison as the answer to all of society's ill. There's a whole range of things like better education, better emotional literacy, looking more at the position of women in society more generally, that would help to address this issue, and not just incarceration in an emotionally incontinent environment trying to fix people who are emotionally abusive that way.
Do you think the victims that you work with a lot of the time, if they knew that it was illegal, would they have maybe done something slightly differently?
Perhaps. A lot of the women I work with in the criminal justice system have experienced different forms of abuse in childhood and as adults, so it would be important for them to recognise that behaviour is not okay.
Excellent. Thank you. Thanks to both of our guests. You'll be back with me later on when we'll be talking about the next debate as well.
All right, Nell, thanks very much. I want to put that point that was made there from one of Nell's guests to Polly, we have to stop resorting to the law. The law doesn't manage to solve all our ills, and it doesn't need to be in our lives as much.
I think it's absolutely right that the law is only one way of dealing with what is a deep-seated cultural issue, actually. And I think the last speaker that you had from the Greenbelt was absolutely right when she said that education is absolutely key, cultural change is key as well. I think it is really important. We have to do something about the fact that at the moment, putting it really simply, police officers attending a domestic violence incident will feel, and in fact know, that they will take no action unless there is a physical injury. And in fact, what can happen, and we've had many cases of this, is a police officer arrives and is greeted by a very, very distraught woman, often not in control of herself, and behind her a very calm perpetrator. And actually, what he then says is, look at this, this is what I have to put up with, this is what I have to deal with, and she's taken off down the station. Now, this happens quite often, and that's because there isn't an understanding of the controlling behaviour that lies behind domestic violence, and the fact that that woman could be, with good reason, absolutely terrified to do anything. Of course, you know, you can get divorced, you can use the existing law, but actually, for women who are vulnerable and who are being abused over a number of years and who simply have been deprived of all of their external contacts outside that relationship and of their own sense of agency, they can't do those things, Anne, that you're saying people can do. They simply can't.
OK, well, all right. We're going to ask our viewers now. Thank you to our guests who've commented on it. If you want to find out more about any of the issues that we've raised so far, of course, you can get the details of organisations who can help on our website. And our vote is open. The question, should emotional abuse in a relationship be a crime? Remember, you can only vote once. If you think it should, text the word vote followed by yes. If you think it shouldn't, text vote followed by the word no. And our text number is 81771. Text will be charged at your standard message rate, and you've got about 20 minutes before the vote closes. You can vote online too, www.bbc.co.uk/Sunday Morning Live. Results will be announced before the end of the programme. It's this morning, but our text and online vote today, this was the question: should emotional abuse in a relationship be a crime? Here is what you told us. 87% said yes, it should be a crime. 13% said no, it shouldn't. Those are very high figures. 87%, Robert, say yes, it should be a crime.
It depends partly who's watching the programme.
That's true, that's true. It's just a snapshot, we should say that.
I mean, I don't argue with the fact that it is a crime. There's no question about it in all moral sense. The problem is how you enforce it and how you don't make ridiculous law. That, I think, is a really difficult issue.
Amy?
Yeah, I think what Robert says, I think we need to be looking out for people who are being abused in any situation and helping them where they are.
OK. And you agree with that?
Yes, of course, although this law is obviously over the line into, you know, into areas the government shouldn't step into, which is personal relationships where there isn't, you know, serious evidence of something really going wrong.
Milo, Amy, Robert, thank you all, and thanks to you at home, thanks to all the guests who joined us here in the studio, and those, of course, who joined us from the Greenbelt Festival with Nell. We're going to be back at the same time next Sunday.